Hi everybody, my name is Greg Crable. I learned a really interesting lesson about writing the other day. When I rewrote part of my own book by hand, pen on paper, the slower process forced me to focus on the core ideas and sharpen the argument. At a time when AI can generate text instantly, the secret to more compelling writing may simply be slowing down and picking up a pen. So let me ask you a question. Why do Americans cut their meat with the fork in their left hand and then switch it to the right hand to eat? Well, it's very simple. It's to slow you down because the point of eating is not to get food into your stomach as fast as possible, right? So something similar might be true of writing. A keyboard is a very efficient way of turning thoughts into words, but writing with pen on paper has surprising benefits. Now, I got this idea from President Obama. He had a similar thought. I recently read that he used to write 10 letters every night to people who had written the White House. Now, that's a lovely, heartwarming thought, and I was glad to read that. But what really caught my eye was the way he did it. He wrote the letters with a felt tip pen on paper. Why? Now, the article had some reasons why he did that, but I wanted to find out for myself. So I rewrote the introduction to one of my own books. So this is the experiment I did. I would read a page and glance ahead to see what was coming, and then I would set it aside and I would write it again, completely from scratch. I didn't try to recreate the printed version, I just re-envisioned it. The change was dramatic. I could see and I could sense that the process of writing with pen on paper changed my thought process. Typing is so fast, writing by hand requires reflection. In my handwritten version, paragraphs shrank, examples disappeared, arguments sharpened, details that once seemed important suddenly felt like clutter. Writing by hand forced me to decide what elements moved the argument forward and what details were unnecessary. To put it in a nutshell, the slower process of writing by hand caused me to ask, what am I really trying to say? Because let's be honest, writing by hand is hard. My brain wants to avoid as much of that labor as possible, so it compresses and summarizes, like what you do when you take notes at a conference. Speed is great for transcription, it's terrible for thinking. That much was obvious to me, but I wanted a more structural analysis of the difference between the two versions, and who knows the structure of language better than a large language model, so I uploaded it all to ChatGPT, and the resulting insights were fascinating. So according to ChatGPT, my typed voice was slightly academic, explanatory, and careful. My handwritten voice was conversational, argumentative, witty, and impatient. Okay. The handwritten version is, according to AI, closer to the way humans process arguments. The handwritten version, there's a problem, and then a frustration, and then a question, and then an explanation. The typed version was context, background, explanation, thesis. The difference is subtle but important. The typed version begins with context, information the writer, in this case me, thinks the reader needs. It's like building a case for a jury, step by step, stone by stone. The handwritten version begins with a problem, something the reader cares about. One structure explains ideas, the other pulls the reader in to the heart of the issue. Now, let's think about the first two words under typed. They were context and background. Now, tell me that doesn't scream boring. My handwritten version compressed the typewritten version with an emphasis on the mental struggle of the subject matter. It's more thesis driven and cuts explanatory details that don't drive the argument. Now, here's what Hal said. When typing, you, meaning me, seem to think in paragraph units. When handwriting, you think in idea units. The handwritten version uses framing sentences. Here's where it gets interesting, but here's the problem. This is frustrating. These narrative signposts guide the reader through the thinking process. I found this analysis fascinating. Here's Hal again. Your handwritten version reveals your natural cognitive style. You think in this order: tension, problem, analogy, cognitive principle, synthesis. But the typed introduction suppresses that and forces a more academic structure. Once again, can you say boring? But this really isn't about my particular cognitive style. The question is, what lessons can publishers learn, and what publishers and content creators, what can they take from this experiment that I did? So here's some takeaways. Let's start with the concern about AI slop. Publishers are wondering how they can distinguish their content from the computer generated version. Well, maybe be less like a computer. Sit down with a pen and paper like a human. Try this with your next essay, or maybe when a junior writer gives you some average uninspired piece of work, ask them to go through these steps. Read it, then set it aside. Now sit down with a piece of paper and a pen and recreate it by hand. Now compare the results. Which version is more compelling? AI writes fast, and it can create a good enough article in seconds. Humans think slowly, and maybe we should consider whether the efficiency of a keyboard is hurting more than it's helping. After all, some great books were written by hand. Now, I am not saying don't use AI. A recent essay I just wrote on my website, I strongly encourage the use of AI in writing. But let's keep the human touch. And if you want writing that sounds human, try slowing the process down using a pen, like a human being. Thanks so much.